The rain has been falling for hours now, soft and steady, turning the narrow earth road into a ribbon of dark mud. Boots move slowly along it, careful with each step, the leather worn thin, the hems of cloaks heavy with damp. Somewhere ahead, a small column of soldiers pauses, not because of danger, but simply because the light is fading and the body grows tired when the day has been long. There is no battle waiting here tonight, only a low fire to be built, a ration of bread to be shared, and the quiet patience of another evening spent far from home. Around them, the Irish countryside stretches out in muted greens and browns. Low hills rise gently, their slopes softened by mist. Hedges and stone walls divide fields where cattle once grazed, now moved farther away for safety. The air smells of wet grass and peat smoke drifting from a distant farmhouse. This is what much of war feels like, not clashing steel, but waiting, walking, listening to the sound of rain settling into the land. Hey, tonight we are going to drift gently backward through time, easing ourselves into the late 16th century, into Ireland during a long and tiring conflict known as the 9 Years' War. It was a slow campaign, stretching from 1594 to 1603, marked less by constant fighting and more by endurance. Long marches, uncertain supply lines, uneasy villages, and ordinary people trying to live their lives while empires argued over control. And as the story unfolds, just a gentle reminder. If you're enjoying this so far, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, only if it feels right. I always love seeing where you're listening from and what time it is for you, so feel free to share that in the comments. Now, stay right where you are. Let the room stay dim, let the background sounds fade in softly, and allow yourself to sink back into the story as it continues. Ireland at the end of the 16th century was a land shaped by rhythm and routine. Days began early, often before the sun had fully lifted the mist from the fields. People lived close to the land, measuring time not by clocks but by light, weather, and season. In small villages, homes were built low and practical, with thatched roofs and earthen floors. Smoke from central hearths curled upward, finding its way out through gaps in the roof, filling rooms with warmth and the familiar scent of burning turf. English authority, though claimed on maps and in documents, felt distant in many places. Power rested instead with local lords, families whose names were woven into the land itself. In Ulster, the northern province, Hugh O'Neill stood among the most powerful. He was a man of careful balance, fluent in English customs and courtly behavior, yet deeply rooted in Gaelic traditions. His authority was not enforced only by force, but by kinship, obligation, and long memory. The war did not arrive all at once, crept in quietly. At first, it was felt through unease, whispered conversations, messengers arriving on horseback, small changes in routine. Attacks delayed here, a demand questioned there. English garrisons appeared more frequently, their presence a reminder that oversight was tightening. For ordinary people, the early years of the conflict felt uncertain but strangely familiar. Life continued. Fields still needed tending. Livestock still wandered the hills. Markets still gathered, though with fewer goods and more guarded conversations. At night, doors were barred a little earlier. Fires burned lower. Stories were told more softly. English soldiers, many of them far from home for the first time, found Ireland both beautiful and exhausting. The land resisted easy movement. Roads were few, often little more than paths. Forests were dense, bogs treacherous. Rain seemed constant. Equipment rusted quickly. Supplies moved slowly, if they moved at all. Much of their time was spent not fighting, but building. Camps were razed and dismantled. Earthworks dug. Wooden forts constructed. In places chosen more for supply access than comfort. Days blurred together in repetition, standing watch, repairing gear, cooking simple meals of grain and salted meat. The Irish forces, meanwhile, relied on knowledge of the land. Movement was quieter, less visible. Small groups traveled familiar paths, disappearing into woods and hills where outsiders struggled to follow. Yet even here, much of war was waiting. Waiting for news, waiting for support, waiting for the season to turn. Winter slowed everything. Cold settled into bones. Fires became precious. Both sides pulled inward, focusing on survival rather than progress. In cottages across the countryside, families huddled together, listening to wind push against walls, wondering what spring would bring. As the years passed, the conflict stretched on, heavy and unresolved. Towns changed hands not always through violence, but through negotiation and fatigue. Records were kept, lists of supplies, names of men, notes on weather and movement. These quiet documents tell the true pace of the war, slow and methodical. In Dublin, officials wrote letters by candlelight, their handwriting careful, their language formal. They spoke of progress and setbacks, of concerns over cost and morale. Far away in London, decisions were made at an even greater distance, shaped by politics, money, and attention pulled in many directions. Back in the countryside, the war felt less like a series of events and more like a condition, something that existed alongside daily life. Children grew older knowing nothing else. Seasons passed marked by harvests and absences. Paths wore deeper into the earth from repeated marching feet. And still, most nights were quiet. Fires flickered. Rain fell. Somewhere, a watchman shifted his weight and listened to the land breathe around him. The war continued, slowly, patiently, without hurry, just as history so often does. The story keeps moving at its own gentle pace, carrying us further into the lives shaped not by moments of noise, but by long stretches of waiting, endurance, and the soft persistence of ordinary days. Smoke rose lazily from low stone cottages, curling into the gray morning sky as dew settled thick on the fields. In some villages, the soft clatter of wooden wheels over mud indicated the arrival of supplies, sacks of grain, salted meat, or bundles of firewood, carefully unloaded and stored in cool cellars. Life moved slowly here, measured by the sun, by the weight of peat in a hearth, by the quiet rhythm of caring for animals. Even as soldiers moved through the countryside, they encountered this same gentle cadence. Cows grazing in fog-drenched pastures, chickens scratching softly at the ground, and children chasing one another between low walls with laughter that blended with the wind. Hugh O'Neill's leadership in Ulster was exercised through observation, careful words, and quiet strategy. He did not rush. His messengers carried letters across hills and rivers, riding at dawn and stopping only when the sun set or the body demanded rest. They followed winding paths that avoided wide roads where English patrols were most likely. Each movement was deliberate, measured, ensuring that every village, every ally, every family connected to him remained aware of the slow and patient presence of leadership. Marching columns moved over rugged terrain with deliberate pace. Soldiers adjusted their burdens, leather boots squelching through the mud, cloaks heavy with rain. Horses, too, were weary from carrying riders or supplies, heads lowered, hooves sinking slightly in the soft earth. A cook stirred a pot of watery broth over a low flame, the aroma of barley and herbs drifting softly into the cool air. Small rituals repeated themselves. Sharpening knives, washing hands in icy streams, checking the alignment of wagons and carts. These were the rhythms of a campaign not defined by constant confrontation, but by careful maintenance of men and material. In towns along the march, English garrisons were established in modest halls, commandeering space not for grandeur, but for practicality. Rooms were shared. Fires burned steadily. Orders were written on scraps of parchment by lamplight, painstakingly careful, and sent with riders along uneven roads. In the quiet evenings, the garrison slept fitfully, listening to wind in the rafters, the soft creak of wood, and distant livestock settling for the night. The Irish countryside itself seemed to participate in this unhurried flow. Woods muffled sound, their dense undergrowth softening the footsteps of travelers. Rivers gurgled gently, winding lazily through the land. Hills rolled into one another, the slopes cushioned with grass and wildflowers, untouched and persistent. Even the weather followed its own measured pace, with slow showers giving way to clouds that hung low, holding the landscape in a dim, diffused light. Villagers adapted quietly to the war that threaded through their lives. They rose early to tend flocks, repaired fences and stone walls, and ensured that children remained close at hand. Bread was baked in small hearths, the scent of warmth and grains curling upward, comforting in its constancy. Milk was carried from cows to churn, butter carefully salted, and peat stacked for the long months of winter to come. These tasks, repeated daily, became a rhythm of resilience, a kind of quiet resistance to the uncertainty of the times. English officers, too, found solace in routine. Maps were unfolded and folded again, sketching hills, rivers, and villages in careful lines. Letters were addressed, sealed, and dispatched. Observations of terrain, weather, and human behavior were noted meticulously, even if no immediate action followed. Each entry, each movement, was a small anchor in the vast, slow-moving expanse of the campaign. Winter brought its own gentle trials. Frost coated the earth each morning, crunching softly beneath boots. Fires burned longer, smoke curling in thin, blue spirals from chimneys and hearths. The sound of wind through bare trees became a constant companion. Soldiers and villagers alike adjusted to the cold, layering clothing, patching cloaks, and maintaining warmth where they could. Meals were simpler. Porridge, stewed root vegetables, and the occasional piece of salted meat, eaten quietly beside the fire as the long night unfolded outside. Even the rhythm of letters and reports slowed during these months. Messengers traveled with greater caution over frozen paths. Horses' breaths puffed mistily into the crisp air. Each journey took longer, each communication more deliberate. Yet this slowness brought a strange comfort. Time itself seemed to stretch and fold over the landscape, giving space for thought, for observation, for quiet reflection. Villagers sometimes gathered, softly, in the evenings to exchange news. They spoke in low voices, describing the weather, the health of animals, or the arrival of distant travelers. Stories of ancestors, old customs, and local lore filled these moments, their cadence unhurried, as if each tale were a thread weaving the present into a broader, enduring tapestry. The war was present, yet softened by these rhythms, becoming part of the background of life rather than its sudden center. Meanwhile, O'Neill's strategies unfolded like quiet ripples. He relied not on dramatic gestures but on careful preparation. Supply caches were established, roads scouted for ease of movement, alliances quietly reinforced. His messengers traveled through forests and along streams, carrying information that shaped decisions days, sometimes weeks, later. The slow passage of information dictated the pace of the campaign, reminding all who moved through this landscape that patience was as critical as strength. Spring arrived with a tentative warmth. Snow melted into rivers, streams swelled gently, and fields softened once more. Soldiers' boots squelched through newly thawed mud. Peat smoke still rose from village chimneys, but the air now carried the faint scent of new growth. Farmers returned to plowing, children played along the edges of fields, and the countryside seemed to breathe once more after the stillness of winter. Even in the midst of war, life persisted in its unhurried way. The war stretched on, and the landscape, unchanged in its fundamental beauty, became a stage for these small, quiet movements. Forts were repaired with slow diligence, messengers traced familiar paths, and local populations continued their daily tasks with resilience. Each day folded into the next, a rhythm of endurance that would carry the conflict forward without urgency, allowing the mind to settle into a soft, meditative awareness of time and place. Paths winding through the hills carried a soft sense of continuity, as though each step echoed the steps of those who had walked before. Soldiers adjusted their packs, the leather creaking faintly in the damp air, and the occasional clatter of hooves on stone reminded everyone that movement, even slow, was still movement. Villagers watched from windows, their faces framed by worn wooden shutters, noting the column of travelers as it passed, but returning quickly to their routines. The churning of butter, the kneading of dough, the gentle tending of hearth fires. Life continued, in small increments, almost imperceptibly, like water slowly carving channels through the earth. In towns near rivers, fishermen launched their boats quietly at dawn, oars dipping rhythmically into the cold water. Nets were cast and hauled in with care, the faint smell of wet fish mixing with the scent of peat fires drifting from nearby cottages. Bridges creaked under careful feet, carts rolled slowly across their planks, and villagers exchanged greetings that sounded softer than usual, aware of the long shadow of war, but unhurried in their daily work. Even the movement of water seemed to match the slow cadence of life during this long campaign. English garrisons stationed in northern Ulster maintained a measured routine. Each morning began with inspection. Weapons checked, armor polished, and small repairs made to tents or wooden structures. Soldiers walked the perimeter in silence, eyes sweeping over the rolling hills and distant forests, listening to wind through branches, the occasional bird call, or the muted sounds of a village beginning its day. Meals were simple, often a thin porridge or small slices of bread, eaten quietly beside the faint warmth of a morning fire. And when the sun reached its height, work slowed, men resting under the soft warmth, letting their thoughts drift as clouds moved across the sky. Meanwhile, O'Neill and his commanders practiced their patience in a similar way, moving thoughtfully through forests and across bogs, speaking softly with messengers and scouts. Plans were drawn not in haste, but in careful consideration of terrain, weather, and the slow rhythms of the local population. Letters were sent, some days arriving quickly, others taking weeks, winding their way along muddy tracks and narrow paths, shaping decisions far from the battlefield without the need for sudden action. Even in a campaign of war, the passage of time itself became a quiet, steady companion. The seasons shifted again. Summer arrived with gentle warmth, sunlight lingering longer in the evening sky. Fields of barley and oats ripened in muted golds, and the hum of insects added a soft soundtrack to the slow march of soldiers and the daily work of villagers. Farmers harvested cautiously, moving slowly through tall stalks, careful not to disturb the livestock that grazed nearby. Women carried baskets of grain, children followed behind, gathering stray ears and watching the swaying plants. The air was heavy with the smell of warm earth, ripening crops, and the faintest hint of smoke from distant fires. Throughout these years, much of the war was defined by waiting. Messages traveled slowly. Soldiers marched from village to village, pausing when supplies were low or the weather forbade further progress. Villagers continued their routines, tending to animals, repairing homes, and maintaining fences. In moments of calm, life could almost feel untouched by the distant command of armies or the distant negotiations of leaders. This rhythm of waiting, of measured, deliberate action, was as much a part of the 9 Years' War as any skirmish or fortification. Evenings settled with a gentle hush. Fires crackled softly in hearths, and smoke curled lazily toward the sky. The scent of baked bread, cooked vegetables, and drying herbs filled cottages. Outside, stars appeared slowly, pinpricks of light above the rolling hills, the low murmur of wind moving through trees the only other sound. Soldiers and villagers alike moved carefully, shadows stretching long, limbs weary from the day's slow labors. The land, soaked in rain and sun, seemed to cradle the quiet, carrying it through the hours until sleep arrived gently. In Ulster, small forts stood on low rises, their walls reinforced with timber and earth, quiet sentinels in a calm landscape. Soldiers paced slowly atop ramparts, observing the gentle slopes and forests, listening to the faintest rustle of leaves. Orders were given softly, meals prepared quietly, and nightly routines observed without rush. Even the act of watching became a meditation, attentive, patient, and completely attuned to the slow unfolding of time. Letters from Dublin reminded commanders of logistics, supply needs, and distant strategies. These documents were read by lamplight, each careful stroke of ink shaping the next movements. Yet no urgency pressed upon the reader. Decisions were deliberate, marches were measured. Supply lines stretched carefully across the soft green countryside. In every village, small routines continued, and the war became a quiet presence in the background of ordinary life. Horses carried riders over soft, muddy tracks, their hooves pressing lightly into the earth. Soldiers' boots squelched quietly with each step. The faint aroma of damp earth, fresh grass, and cooking fires accompanied the slow march. Children in villages peered cautiously from doorways, fascinated by the distant column, yet quickly returning to the small tasks of daily life, feeding animals, helping mothers with chores, or running along low stone walls in games of their own quiet inventiveness. These small acts, so ordinary, continued amid the long shadow of the campaign. The 9 Years' War, in its very essence, was a conflict of endurance and patience. Months and years passed without dramatic action, defined by observation, careful planning, and the ongoing rhythm of daily life. Soldiers wrote letters home in soft, deliberate hand. Villagers repaired thatched roofs in quiet mornings. Fields were tilled, livestock tended, and fires maintained as the seasons moved slowly from spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, and back again. Morning light stretched gently over the low hills, brushing the mist from the valleys in soft, silvery streaks. Soldiers awoke slowly in their tents, the canvas walls damp with condensation. Boots were laced carefully, cloaks adjusted to the chill of early hours, and the smell of damp wool and peat smoke mingled with the faint scent of wet earth. Small fires were coaxed to life, a few embers glowing red as water was heated for thin porridge. Conversation was minimal, quiet murmurs shared over bowls and wooden spoons, the sound blending seamlessly with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. Villages along the march adjusted naturally to the presence of English troops. Livestock were guided away from the main roads, small doors were secured, and doors of the cottages were left slightly ajar to allow airflow while keeping curious eyes and hands at bay. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the rhythm of everyday life, churning butter, kneading bread, carrying water from wells, continued with deliberate ease. The soldiers, aware of the subtle routines of those whose land they traversed, moved with careful respect, mindful of the quiet energy that surrounded them. Hugh O'Neill's forces, observing the English, often appeared and disappeared in a measured, almost imperceptible fashion. Scouts would slip through woods and along riverbanks, reporting back on movement, the state of roads, and the habits of local people. The war was conducted not with continuous confrontation, but with a patient, watchful presence. It stretched across hills and rivers, over bogs and through forests, and its progress was slow, deliberate, and often dictated by weather and terrain rather than strategy alone. As the days unfolded, camps became familiar landscapes. Soldiers built small hearths within temporary shelters, mended their gear, and tended to horses. The sound of water dripping from tent flaps, the soft murmur of conversation, and the occasional scraping of a wagon wheel against uneven ground became part of the ambient rhythm of life. Each day was recorded carefully in letters and reports, a reminder of the slow, methodical nature of the campaign, where patience and endurance mattered more than sudden action. In the surrounding countryside, farmers tended their fields with careful attention. Barley and oats swayed in the wind, cattle grazed quietly on hillsides, and sheep moved slowly along stone-lined paths. The air carried a mix of earthy scents, wet soil, drying hay, peat smoke, mingling with the faint saltiness of distant rivers. Villagers moved through these spaces in calm, familiar routines, their work punctuated by pauses to watch distant columns of soldiers or to listen for the faint sound of a messenger approaching along a hidden track. Evenings in the camps were long and quiet. Fires glowed low, illuminating faces marked by fatigue, but softened by the gentle warmth. Soldiers cleaned weapons slowly, exchanged low words about distant families, and settled into blankets or straw mats with the muted hum of conversation fading into the night. The stars above were scattered across the sky in soft clusters, and the faint, persistent sound of the wind through the trees created a lullaby that matched the slow, deliberate pace of life in both camp and village. Winter returned, bringing frost and thin layers of snow that blanketed the rolling hills. Soldiers and villagers alike adapted to the cold with layered clothing, careful tending of fires, and deliberate movements. The ground, frozen and quiet, slowed the movement of both men and animals. Streams froze at the edges, their gentle murmur softened beneath sheets of ice. Smoke from hearths lingered longer in the cold air, carrying with it the faint aroma of cooked grains and warming herbs. Each day became a study in patience, endurance, and the gentle observation of a landscape temporarily suspended in stillness. Supply lines moved with careful precision. Carts creaked over frozen roads, horses trotted slowly, and messengers rode with measured care, their breath puffing into the crisp air. Orders were read by candlelight in small forts, their walls holding in the quiet of the season. Decisions were made thoughtfully, not in haste, respecting both the limits of human energy and the slow rhythms of the Irish countryside. Here, even in war, life flowed with a soft, unhurried cadence. Villagers found comfort in continuity. Fires crackled in hearths, bread baked slowly in ovens, and children learned to track the subtle changes in the landscape. The first shoots of green pushing through snow, the migration of birds along quiet rivers, the formation of ice patterns on small ponds. These details became anchors, small constants in a world where armies moved slowly and the passing of seasons was felt in every cautious step, every careful arrangement of daily life. Even the act of observing became a meditation. Soldiers gazed across low hills, noting the positions of streams, trees, and stone walls. Scouts lingered at forest edges, noting the subtle sounds of wildlife and human activity. Farmers paused between tasks to survey their fields, listening to wind through hedges and counting livestock with deliberate attention. Time seemed to stretch, measured in soft increments rather than dramatic moments, and the world itself felt steady, persistent, and quietly alive. And so, the 9 Years' War continued, not in bursts of violence, but in the patient, enduring presence of people and landscape alike. Each day brought small movements, careful observations, and routines that persisted across seasons. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike experienced the war not as sudden upheaval, but as a long, unfolding story shaped by endurance, observation, and the gentle persistence of everyday life. The first light of dawn broke softly over the hills, filtering through low clouds and glinting off dew-laden grass. Horses stirred in their small enclosures, stamping gently as their breaths rose in curling mist. Soldiers began the day slowly, tying knots carefully in straps and adjusting packs that had grown heavy with weeks on the road. The air carried a faint scent of damp wool, peat smoke, and the ever-present richness of earth softened by rain. Every step, every motion, was deliberate, measured by the subtle sounds of the countryside. The creak of timber, the soft murmur of flowing streams, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Villages along the routes of the marches retained their quiet rhythms. Children ran between stone walls, their laughter muted by distance and the careful attention of elders. Women moved with slow, purposeful gestures, carrying water from wells, gathering firewood, tending small gardens where herbs and root vegetables grew. Smoke from hearths drifted upward in thin ribbons, carrying the faint smell of cooking grains, milk, and peat. Even the animals seemed to participate in the gentle rhythm of the day. Cows grazed, sheep moved in small flocks, and chickens pecked quietly at the soft, damp ground. In forests nearby, scouts of O'Neill's forces moved with almost imperceptible grace, stepping over roots, around stones, and through undergrowth. Their eyes tracked paths familiar only to them, ears attuned to subtle sounds, the snapping of twigs, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle flow of streams. Messages were exchanged quietly, folded into careful instructions and delivered along hidden routes. This was the slow dance of strategy, executed not with sudden clashes, but with careful observation and patient timing. The English columns moved in parallel, the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional clop of hooves marking the rhythm of their advance. Soldiers paused periodically to rest, wash, or tend their horses, speaking in low murmurs. Each camp established was modest and practical. Small fires built for warmth and cooking, tents arranged with measured spacing, paths swept clear for movement. Supplies were divided slowly, rations handed out with attention to necessity rather than haste. Every gesture, every task, contributed to the long endurance of the campaign. In Dublin, distant from the fields and forests, clerks recorded the movements of troops and the state of supply lines. Their hands moved carefully over parchment, the scratch of quill echoing softly in quiet rooms. Letters were dispatched to commanders in the field, sometimes taking weeks to arrive, traveling slowly across muddy roads, rivers, and hills. Even in administration, the pace of life matched the campaign itself, methodical, unhurried, deliberate. Winter returned again with frost coating the fields and thin layers of snow settling. On rooftops, soldiers adjusted their clothing, layering thick woolens and mending gloves or cloaks as needed. Fires burned longer, hearths tended carefully, and meals were simple but sustaining. Villagers huddled closer to their own fires, keeping livestock near to the warmth of barns and byres. Paths hardened with frost, footsteps crunching quietly, the landscape hushed under the subtle weight of ice. Spring followed in a slow, measured way. Green shoots emerged from thawed earth, rivers swelled with melted snow, and the countryside began its quiet renewal. Soldiers' boots sank into softening mud, and horses shook off the chill of winter. Cottages filled with the scent of fresh bread, early vegetables, and drying herbs. Children chased one another between low walls, their feet stirring the first grasses of the season. Even the war itself seemed to pause in recognition of the slow unfolding of nature. Campaigns continued, yes, but measured carefully, paced by the rhythms of earth and sky. Villagers and soldiers alike moved with attentive care, noticing small changes in the land. Buds swelling on trees, streams running clearer with melted ice, the quiet return of birdsong. Fortifications were repaired slowly, not in haste, the work steady and deliberate. Messages continued their journey along hidden routes, noting the movement of supplies, the progress of allies, and the slow evolution of plans. In every element, the war was not sudden, but extended over years like a soft, persistent tide. Evenings softened into long stretches of gentle shadow. Fires glowed low, casting warmth across wooden floors and straw mats. Soldiers cleaned weapons and polished armor, not with urgency, but with steady attention. Villagers carried on their own quiet routines, churning butter, mending clothes, sweeping paths, preparing food. Conversations were subdued, words floating gently in the cold evening air. Outside, stars scattered slowly across the sky, their light cool and distant, blending with the faint rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of distant streams. Through all of this, O'Neill's strategies unfolded with patient care. Supplies were carefully placed along routes, scouts reported in measured detail, and alliances were maintained through correspondence and quiet negotiation. Every step, every observation, every careful word contributed to the slow unfolding of the campaign. There were no sudden leaps, only the continuous passage of days, weeks, and months, punctuated by the soft rhythm of work, weather, and movement. Mist settled over the hills again, softening the edges of stone walls and hedgerows, turning the familiar landscape into a quiet, blurred tapestry of gray and green. Soldiers walked slowly along muddy tracks, boots sinking slightly with each step, the gentle squelch beneath them a constant companion. Their cloaks were heavy with rain and dew, yet they moved with a calm deliberation, careful to keep pace with their horses and wagons. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, peat, and the low smoke rising from distant villages, mixing into a soft, comforting aroma that seemed to wrap the world in quiet continuity. Villagers tended to their chores with the same measured rhythm. Women carried water from wells, filling clay pots and returning them to hearths where fires burned steadily. Men guided livestock across rolling fields, watching their movements and adjusting fences where necessary. Children moved along low walls and between cottages, their games gentle and unhurried, echoing the soft cadence of life that persisted despite the distant movements of armies. Bread was baked in small ovens, its aroma weaving through narrow streets and reaching even the tents of passing soldiers. The English forces moved with careful patience. Each camp was raised and dismantled slowly, with tents arranged in neat rows, small fires lit to warm both men and horses. Soldiers checked their gear with methodical precision, polished buckles and straps catching the weak morning light. Meals were simple, porridge thickened with a little milk, thin slices of bread, and sometimes a small portion of salted meat, eaten quietly beside the gentle warmth of a low fire. Even washing and grooming were conducted at a leisurely pace, conscious of both effort and propriety. In Ulster, Hugh O'Neill observed his surroundings with measured care. He walked among his men and messengers, listening to reports and giving directions in a voice soft enough not to disturb the quiet of the forest around them. Scouts moved like shadows, threading through trees and along streams, carrying messages with care and attention to detail. Every movement was deliberate, every decision measured, allowing the land itself to guide the pace of action. In this way, war became not a rush of chaos but a slow, deliberate unfolding of strategy woven gently into the landscape. Seasonal changes marked the passing of time more than any battle. Spring brought tentative warmth, and the first shoots of green pushed through thawing soil. Farmers plowed carefully, children chased one another along stone walls, and the air carried the soft scent of new growth mixed with lingering smoke from peat fires. Summer followed, with low suns stretching shadows long across the fields, and the soft hum of insects joining the ongoing soundtrack of daily life. Soldiers and villagers alike adjusted to these changes, pacing their work and rest in harmony with the subtle rhythms of the earth. Winter, when it returned, wrapped the land in frost and thin snow. Rivers hardened along their edges, and the soft crunch of boots over frozen ground became a familiar sound. Fires were tended more carefully, clothing layered thicker, and routines slowed naturally. Messages took longer to reach their destinations. Wagons creaked more slowly along icy roads, and even the movement of animals became deliberate and cautious. In this quiet, enduring landscape, patience became as important as planning, and endurance became a steady companion. Evenings unfolded with soft, gentle light. Candles flickered in small cottages and forts alike, casting warm, dancing shadows across walls. Conversations were subdued, stories told in hushed tones about ancestors, seasons, and old customs. Soldiers rested beside fires, listening to the distant rustle of leaves and the faint sound of water moving through streams. Villagers moved quietly about their homes, feeding animals, preparing simple meals, and mending clothing. The world seemed to contract into a soft cocoon of warmth, sound, and smell, all blending into a gentle rhythm that mirrored the slow pace of the campaign. Letters continued to traverse the countryside, carried by riders who knew the paths well, their journey measured in days rather than hours. Reports detailed supplies, troop movements, and weather, each entry careful and precise. These small, deliberate acts, the writing of a letter, the cleaning of a weapon, the maintenance of a fence, formed the true heartbeat of the 9 Years' War. Not dramatic clashes, but quiet, patient persistence, weaving together the lives of soldiers, villagers, and leaders into a slow, continuous flow. Villages along the march remained resilient. Women prepared meals slowly, kneading dough and churning butter, while children followed in gentle games that mirrored the quiet patterns of nature. Animals grazed under watchful eyes, rivers reflected soft skies, and the gentle slopes of the hills carried the muted sounds of everyday life. Soldiers observed this rhythm, often pausing to watch the simple beauty of the land, feeling the gentle shift of seasons, and noting the small changes that marked the passage of time. Through the years, O'Neill's strategy unfolded quietly, deliberately. Supply routes were maintained, alliances reinforced with careful words, and movement was dictated by observation and planning. Scouts returned with reports of roads, villages, and the subtle changes of weather. Every choice respected the rhythm of the land and the slow passage of time, allowing the war to continue not as sudden upheaval, but as an enduring, patient presence threaded through everyday life. The hills rolled gently beneath soft morning light, their slopes dusted with dew that caught the first rays and turned them into tiny, flickering jewels across the grass. Soldiers stirred quietly in their camps, stretching limbs stiff from the chill of the night, shaking the damp from cloaks and boots before stepping into the soft, yielding earth. Fires glowed low, smoke curling in thin, lazy ribbons toward a sky pale and misted. Breakfasts were simple and unhurried. A thin porridge shared among small groups, bread broken carefully by hand, water drawn from nearby streams and warmed over modest flames. Every movement was measured, every breath deliberate. As the day began slowly and softly, villagers began their own routines in tandem with the soft light. Doors opened just enough to let in air, and the faint smell of peat smoke drifted outward, mingling with the earthy scent of the fields. Women carried small bundles of wood and clay pots to hearths where the day's cooking would begin. Children wandered along hedgerows, careful not to disturb livestock grazing nearby, their laughter muffled by distance, blending with the gentle chorus of birds and insects awakening with the day. Men guided cattle slowly to pastures, listening to the low murmur of the animals, noting the rhythm of their breathing and movements, the quiet pace of life anchoring the day. English soldiers advanced through the countryside with the same careful patience that had come to define the campaign. Boots pressed into soft soil, wagons creaked along narrow paths, and the occasional clop of a horse's hoof punctuated the otherwise gentle silence. Soldiers adjusted packs and gear, polished buckles and straps, and checked weapons with meticulous attention, not in haste, but as part of the rhythm of the day. The pace was slow, deliberate, measured by terrain, weather, and the ongoing soft currents of human life all around them. Hugh O'Neill observed these movements with the same calm and patience that characterized his leadership. Scouts moved lightly through forests and along riverbanks, carrying reports on distant roads, small villages, and the condition of the land itself. These details informed his strategies, but decisions were never rushed. Each plan unfolded as part of the long, continuous flow of time, woven delicately into the landscape, the seasons, and the lives of those who inhabited it. Spring brought gradual change to the hills and valleys. Streams swelled softly with melted snow, wildflowers pushed through the soil, and the subtle green of new leaves softened the edges of the forests. Soldiers paused occasionally to drink from clear, cold streams, to rest beneath gentle shade, or to adjust their packs. Villagers moved with attentive care, planting early crops, repairing fences, and tending animals. Life's rhythm continued in careful harmony with the land, slow, deliberate, and entirely absorbing. Summer arrived with warmth that lingered in the hills long after the sun had climbed high in the sky. Fields shimmered in muted golds, barley swaying in gentle breezes, oats rustling softly as hands moved to harvest or tend. Soldiers rested in dappled shade, watching the movement of clouds, listening to insects, or simply closing their eyes for a moment under the quiet sun. Villagers worked steadily, aware of the presence of distant armies but unhurried in their duties. The scent of fresh-cut grass mingling with smoke from hearths and occasional fires built to clear brush or dry grains. Evenings were particularly soft during these months. Fires burned low in cottages and camps alike, casting warm light over wooden floors, straw mats, and tents pitched in neat rows. Conversation was hushed, words shared quietly about distant kin, the changing landscape, or small, local stories. Children's play slowed, the soft clatter of simple toys replaced by whispers and careful steps. The sky turned gradually from pale gold to dusky lavender, stars emerging slowly, their light cool and distant against the deepening night. Winds rustled leaves, rivers murmured in the valleys, and the world seemed to hold its breath in gentle anticipation of sleep. Letters continued to trace the slow flow of the campaign. Riders traced winding paths through fields and forests, careful to preserve their strength and that of their horses. Each note, each report, was folded carefully, sealed, and delivered with quiet diligence. In Dublin and London, clerks read these letters, transcribed their contents, and passed on instructions, all moving at a pace that reflected the measured, patient reality of the war. Decisions were deliberate, movements planned, and each action woven softly into the continuous rhythm of months and years. Winter returned again, painting the fields in frost and light snow. Soldiers layered woolens, checked fires, and moved slowly across frozen paths. Villagers huddled closer to hearths, attending to animals and storing food, the cold shaping their days and slowing movement in a deliberate, predictable way. Streams whispered quietly under thin sheets of ice, and the wind through bare trees created a constant, gentle murmur, reminding all who listened of the quiet persistence of nature. Even in the midst of war, life adapted to this rhythm, carrying on with careful attention to the details that ensured survival and continuity. Throughout the years, much of the 9 Years' War unfolded not in dramatic clashes but in this soft, persistent, and patient flow of life. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike moved according to the quiet, enduring patterns of earth and season. Camps were raised and dismantled, fires built and maintained, letters written and delivered, paths walked slowly and deliberately. Each day held its own measured significance, each small act contributing to the long, unhurried story of a landscape and its people enduring a conflict defined as much by patience as by any battle. The soft light of early morning spilled across the rolling hills once more, brushing gently against mist-laden valleys, where streams curled lazily along their familiar paths. Soldiers stirred in their camps with slow, deliberate motions, stretching stiff limbs and adjusting the straps of packs heavy with supplies. Cloaks, damp from dew and the night's chill, hung in gentle folds as men moved quietly between small fires that glowed low, the faint aroma of smoke and wet earth mixing with the distant, faint scent of peat from neighboring villages. Each movement was measured, as if the pace of life itself had seeped into the rhythm of the soldiers' bodies. Villagers carried on with their morning routines, their steps soft against the worn paths and mud-softened roads. Women carefully carried water from wells, clay pots balanced on hips or heads, returning to hearths where small fires had begun to warm. Children wandered along low stone walls, moving slowly between cottages, their soft laughter blending with the gentle chorus of birds and the muted hum of the countryside awakening. Men guided livestock across fields, their hands moving slowly to secure gates, adjust fences, and ensure animals grazed safely. Every action seemed deliberate, measured by the subtle sounds and sensations of a land that had known patience for centuries. The English columns advanced through the countryside in gentle unison, boots pressing into yielding earth, wagons creaking softly along narrow paths, and horses' hooves making rhythmic, muted sounds. Soldiers adjusted gear and polished buckles with meticulous care, aware of the quiet around them. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and patient, measured by the rolling hills, the forests, and the soft presence of the land itself. Each day's march was not a rush toward battle, but a careful passage through territory shaped by both nature and human life. In Ulster, Hugh O'Neill moved with quiet attentiveness, observing not only his own men but the shifting patterns of the land. Scouts slipped through forests and along riverbanks with soft, precise steps, reporting on the movement of troops, the condition of roads, and the life of villages. Every action was measured, every decision deliberate, woven into the slow unfolding of a long, quiet campaign. The war here was not sudden or chaotic. It existed as a patient, enduring presence, layered into the familiar rhythms of everyday life. Spring arrived gradually, soft and unhurried. Frosts melted into streams that ran clear and cold through the valleys, and green shoots pushed upward through softened soil. Fields were plowed carefully by farmers, children ran along hedgerows, and animals grazed quietly on the hills. Soldiers paused beneath the shade of trees, drinking from streams, adjusting saddles, and listening to the distant murmur of village life. Even in war, the land dictated the pace, and both English and Irish movements unfolded gently alongside the subtle rhythms of nature. As summer stretched its warmth over the countryside, fields shimmered in muted golds, barley and oats swaying softly in the breeze. Soldiers rested beneath gentle shade, observing clouds drifting slowly across the sky, listening to insects, or closing their eyes for a quiet moment of rest. Villagers continued with careful attention to their tasks, harvesting, repairing fences, tending livestock. Fires drifted thin smoke upward, bread baked slowly in ovens, and the faint scent of cooking mixed with the warm, earthy air of the hills. Life and war intertwined in this long, unhurried rhythm, each day following the previous with gentle consistency. Evenings were soft and prolonged, a time for quiet reflection and care. Fires glowed low in cottages and campfires alike, casting warmth across straw mats and wooden floors. Soldiers polished weapons, mended gear, and spoke softly of family and home. Villagers moved gently about their daily tasks, churning butter, kneading dough, repairing clothes, feeding animals. The wind whispered through trees, rivers murmured through valleys, and stars slowly appeared across the darkening sky. Shadows stretched long and gentle, carrying the rhythm of the day into night. The world seemed to breathe, slow and steady, carrying everyone into the soft embrace of sleep. Letters and reports continued their quiet passage across the countryside. Riders followed winding paths through forests and along streams, delivering careful instructions and observations. Clerks in Dublin and London read these letters slowly, transcribing them with careful attention, then dispatching replies that would take weeks to arrive. Every written word, every careful report, became part of the soft, unhurried pulse of the campaign. Decisions unfolded in time measured by days and weeks, not hours or minutes, allowing both soldiers and villagers to sink into the continuous rhythm of life in a land shaped by patient endurance. Winter returned again with gentle inevitability, frosting fields and covering roofs with thin layers of snow. Soldiers wrapped themselves in layers of wool, tending fires and moving carefully along frozen paths. Villagers huddled close to hearths, feeding animals, storing food, and tending their daily routines in deliberate, quiet rhythm. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, winds rustled through bare branches, and the world seemed wrapped in a hushed, gentle blanket. Even in conflict, life adapted, flowing slowly, softly, and patiently. The seasons cycled repeatedly, each bringing subtle changes. The thawing of frost, the bloom of wildflowers, the long, warm shadows of summer, and the quiet hush of winter. Soldiers, Scouts, villagers, and leaders moved in step with this soft pulse. Each action deliberate and every day folded gently into the next. Even the progress of the war itself seemed to respect this unhurried cadence, unfolding slowly across hills, forests, and rivers, becoming a part of the daily life of those who lived in its reach. Camps and forts were maintained with steady care. Fires glowed low, tents were pitched and adjusted, and meals were prepared with soft, measured movements. Horses were groomed and tended, weapons cleaned, and maps carefully redrawn to reflect the slow passage of time and the shifting positions of allies and forces. Scouts moved like quiet shadows, carrying messages with diligence and patience, weaving through woods and along streams, bringing news that would shape decisions gently, methodically, and without urgency. Life in villages mirrored this soft rhythm. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned with care, livestock moved along familiar paths, and children played with gentle, unhurried energy. Conversations were soft, stories of ancestors and old customs told with deliberate, slow cadence. Even the sounds of the land, the trickle of streams, the rustle of leaves, the low hum of insects, participated in this quiet continuity, forming a gentle soundtrack to the long, patient unfolding of the war. The first light of dawn filtered softly through mist that clung to the valleys and hills, turning each blade of grass into a tiny prism catching the pale sun. Soldiers stirred slowly in their camps, stretching limbs and shifting beneath damp woolen cloaks, the leather of boots creaking softly with movement. Fires glowed low, smoke curling in thin, lazy ribbons toward the sky. Breakfasts were quiet, a thin porridge ladled carefully into bowls, bread torn gently by hand, and water warmed over embers to wash down the morning meal. Every movement was deliberate, each breath taken in harmony with the rhythm of the waking countryside. Villagers rose with the light as well, moving gently through their familiar routines. Women carried clay pots from wells, balancing them with ease as they returned to hearths where fires had been coaxed to life. Children wandered along low stone walls and paths between cottages, their quiet laughter blending with the soft murmur of streams and the distant call of birds. Men guided livestock across the dewy fields, adjusting fences or herding animals with slow, practiced gestures. The air smelled of damp earth, peat smoke, and the faint sweetness of grasses and flowers awakening with the day. Life, in its small details, moved steadily, almost imperceptibly, forward. The English columns moved through the countryside in parallel, boots pressing softly into yielding earth, wagons creaking along narrow paths, and horses' hooves striking in gentle rhythm. Soldiers checked their packs, adjusted cloaks, polished buckles, and cleaned weapons, all with a calm, methodical attention. The pace was slow, measured by terrain, weather, and the quiet movements of the land itself. Each day's journey, though uneventful in drama, was a careful weaving into the larger tapestry of the campaign. Hugh O'Neill observed with patient attentiveness. Scouts moved lightly through forests and along rivers, reporting on troop movements, road conditions, and the subtle signs of village life. Plans unfolded not in haste but in careful deliberation, respecting the rhythm of both people and landscape. Messages were sent and received, traveling over days and weeks, shaping decisions that were never rushed but thoughtfully measured. In this way, the war became less a clash of armies and more a quiet, enduring presence threaded gently through everyday life. As spring gave way to summer, fields ripened slowly in muted golds, barley swaying softly in the breeze, oats rustling under hands that tended them carefully. Soldiers paused beneath the shade of trees, drinking from streams, adjusting saddles, and listening to the faint hum of insects and distant village life. Villagers harvested crops, repaired stone walls, and tended animals, their movements deliberate and calm. Fires smoked faintly from cottages, bread baked slowly, and the sense of earth, warm grain, and peat mingled gently in the summer air. Evenings stretched long and gentle. Fires glowed low in both cottages and camps, casting warmth over straw mats, wooden floors, and tents pitched with careful spacing. Soldiers mended gear, polished armor, and spoke softly of family and distant home. Villagers moved quietly about their chores, churning butter, preparing evening meals, repairing clothing, and feeding livestock. The soft murmur of wind through trees, the faint sound of streams in the distance, and the gradual emergence of stars created a lullaby that carried everyone toward the stillness of night. Letters and reports traced the slow current of the campaign. Riders navigated winding paths through forests and over streams, delivering information with careful attention to horses' strength and terrain. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements, supplies, and observations with meticulous care. Each report became part of a gentle, continuous pulse that dictated the rhythm of strategy and daily life alike. The campaign moved in harmony with the land, seasons, and people, unfolding slowly, deliberately, and almost imperceptibly. Winter returned once more, softening the world with frost and delicate layers of snow. Soldiers dressed in layered wool, tending fires, moving slowly across frozen paths. Villagers huddled close to hearths, caring for animals, preparing food stores, and attending to daily routines in careful, measured ways. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, and wind moved through bare branches, adding a gentle, constant murmur to the hush of the season. Even in the midst of war, life adapted to this. Rhythm, soft, patient, and enduring. Camps and forts were maintained with attention and care. Fires glowed, tents were pitched and reinforced, weapons cleaned, horses groomed, and maps carefully redrawn to account for subtle changes in terrain and the shifting positions of troops. Scouts moved silently, observing forests, rivers, and villages, bringing reports that shaped plans with patience rather than urgency. Even in the mechanics of war, there was a softness, a slow pulse that carried both strategy and people forward gently through years of waiting. Villages mirrored this rhythm of quiet persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned, livestock moved through familiar paths, and children played with gentle curiosity. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and traditions told softly, each word deliberate and unhurried. Nature participated in this quiet continuity. The wind whispered through leaves, streams flowed gently, and the distant hills held the soft imprint of time and human life, carrying the passage of days as smoothly as a lullaby carries the mind towards sleep. The 9 Years' War, over its long, patient years, revealed the endurance not just of armies but of everyday life. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike moved according to the unhurried pulse of seasons, terrain, and human rhythm. Camps were set and dismantled, fires built and maintained, letters written and delivered, paths walked with careful attention, and small gestures performed over and over again. In all this, the war became part of the fabric of ordinary existence, a long, quiet thread woven into the soft, enduring tapestry of time itself. The pale morning light stretched gently across the rolling hills, settling on dew-specked grass and softening the edges of stone walls and hedgerows. Soldiers stirred quietly in their tents, stretching stiff limbs, adjusting cloaks and packs, and tending small fires that glowed faintly, sending wisps of smoke curling lazily into the crisp air. Breakfast was slow and simple, a thin porridge, a slice of bread, a sip of warm water drawn from a nearby stream. Each gesture was deliberate, each movement soft and measured, as though the very rhythm of life dictated the pace of the campaign. Villagers moved with a similarly gentle purpose. Women carried clay pots from wells, balancing them carefully as they returned to hearths, coaxing fire to life and preparing simple morning meals. Children wandered along stone walls and narrow paths, stepping lightly over the damp earth, their quiet laughter blending with the soft hum of birds and insects. Men guided livestock through fields, closing gates, adjusting fences, and checking on the condition of animals, all with patient care. The scent of damp earth, peat smoke, and faint herbs in the fields blended together, carrying a soothing aroma that seemed to settle over the land like a slow, gentle breath. English soldiers advanced in measured columns, their boots pressing into the soft ground with careful rhythm, wagons creaking faintly along narrow, muddy paths. Horses stamped gently, tossing their heads, while men checked packs, polished buckles, and cleaned weapons with quiet attention. The pace was unhurried, each step a soft echo of the day before, marked not by urgency but by steady, patient progress. The countryside, lush and enduring, seemed to cradle each movement, softening the presence of armies in its muted greens and browns. Hugh O'Neill observed these movements with the same quiet attentiveness that had characterized his leadership throughout the war. Scouts moved lightly through forests and along riverbanks, listening for subtle sounds, noting the position of distant troops, the state of roads, and the condition of villages. Each report was delivered carefully, folded into letters and instructions that shaped strategy without haste. Every decision, every movement, unfolded gently, guided by patience and observation rather than sudden action. Spring slowly gave way to summer, the earth warming, streams flowing clear and cold through valleys, and the soft green of new leaves carpeting the forests. Fields shimmered in muted golds as barley and oats swayed in the light breeze. Soldiers paused under trees to drink, rest, or adjust packs, listening to the distant sounds of villages stirring with life. Villagers worked steadily, harvesting early crops, repairing fences, tending livestock, and baking bread in slow, measured rhythms. Fires from cottages drifted smoke upward, mingling with the scent of warm earth and ripe grain, the countryside alive in subtle, gentle ways. Evenings were long and soft, fires glowing low, casting gentle light across straw mats and wooden floors in both camps and cottages. Soldiers repaired gear and polished weapons, speaking quietly of family, home, or distant past events. Villagers moved about chores with careful, deliberate gestures, churning butter, kneading dough, mending clothing, and feeding livestock. The wind whispered softly through trees, rivers murmured in the valleys, and stars appeared slowly, their cool, distant light blending with the deepening shadows. The quiet of the evening was profound, a lullaby of natural and human rhythms, carrying all toward the gentle rest of night. Letters and reports traced the long, patient flow of the campaign. Riders followed winding paths through forests, across rivers and over hills, delivering news and instructions carefully, mindful of terrain and horses alike. Clerks in Dublin and London read and recorded these letters slowly, transcribing their contents with precision before dispatching replies. Decisions unfolded over days and weeks, in harmony with the soft, enduring pace of the land. Even strategy was gentle, measured, and deliberate, echoing the rhythms of nature and human life alike. Winter settled again over the rolling hills, frosting the fields and softening edges with pale, crystalline layers of snow. Soldiers layered themselves in wool, tending fires with care and moving slowly across frozen paths. Villagers huddled near hearths, caring for animals and storing provisions, attending to the quiet, steady tasks of survival. Streams whispered beneath thin ice, wind rustled through bare branches, and the land seemed wrapped in a hushed blanket. Even in war, life conformed to this slow rhythm, adapting to cold and season with patience and care. The rhythm of the 9 Years' War continued, defined more by endurance than by sudden action. Soldiers maintained camps, cleaned weapons, and tended horses. Villagers baked bread, fed livestock, and mended homes. Scouts moved silently, observing forests, rivers, and distant villages, their reports shaping plans that unfolded slowly and deliberately. Each day was a quiet act of continuity, every small gesture weaving the passage of years into the soft fabric of life. War, in its slow, patient persistence, became part of the enduring landscape, a gentle thread alongside the routines of ordinary people and the measured unfolding of the seasons. Camps and forts were maintained with care and attention. Tents were pitched and adjusted, fires burned steadily, weapons were cleaned and polished, and horses were groomed and fed. Scouts moved quietly through woods and along streams, bringing observations and messages with meticulous attention. Strategy unfolded gradually, respecting the pace of both soldiers and landscape, allowing every movement to blend with the soft rhythm of life that surrounded the war. Even the mechanics of conflict became a gentle, deliberate activity, as slow and methodical as the flowing rivers and shifting hills themselves. Villages mirrored this quiet persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned with care, livestock moved calmly along familiar paths, and children played with soft curiosity. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and old traditions told in deliberate, unhurried tones. Nature participated in this continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured softly, and distant hills held the subtle marks of time, carrying the rhythm of life gently forward. Every small act, from tending a fire to guiding an animal, became part of the enduring cadence of the countryside and the long, patient campaign. The 9 Years' War stretched over years, seasons blending into one another, each carrying its own textures of light, scent, and sound. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike moved in harmony with the slow passage of time. Camps were razed and dismantled, fires maintained, letters written and delivered, and small daily tasks repeated with quiet diligence. In this long, patient flow, the war became inseparable from the rhythm of life, an enduring presence woven seamlessly into the fabric of the land, the people, and the seasons. The soft gray light of dawn stretched across rolling hills, filtering gently through the lingering morning mist. Soldiers stirred in their camps with slow, careful motions, stretching limbs stiff from long nights, brushing dew from cloaks, and tending the small embers of fires that had been left to smolder. Breakfast was quiet and deliberate. Thin porridge ladled into bowls, bread torn with care, and water warmed over embers to swallow slowly. Each act performed with an unhurried attention that seemed to match the rhythm of the land itself. Even the faint rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of streams blended into the soft cadence of the morning. Villagers rose in tandem with the day, their steps gentle across the dampened earth and worn paths. Women carried water from wells in balanced clay pots, returning to hearths where fires glowed faintly, coaxing life from the morning chill. Children moved between cottages and along low stone walls, their quiet laughter carried lightly on the breeze, mingling with birdsong and the soft hum of distant insects. Men guided livestock slowly, checking fences, moving gates, and tending to animals with careful, measured gestures. The air was a mixture of damp earth, peat smoke, and faint herbs from nearby gardens, a subtle fragrance that carried through the valley and seemed to settle over the day. The English columns moved steadily through the countryside, boots pressing softly into yielding soil, wagons creaking faintly along narrow tracks, and horses' hooves marking a slow, rhythmic beat. Soldiers adjusted packs and polished straps, cleaned weapons with gentle care, and checked their surroundings with deliberate attention. The pace was unhurried, dictated by terrain, weather, and the slow pulse of human and natural life that enveloped them. Each step, each small movement, carried a quiet gravity, a patient unfolding of time and space. Hugh O'Neill observed the landscape and movements with measured calm. Scouts slipped through forests and along riverbanks, listening for subtle sounds. The soft lowing of cattle, the murmur of distant streams, the rustle of leaves under a fox's paws. Reports traveled back through hidden routes, folded into letters and careful instructions that guided strategy without haste. Each decision, each motion of troops, unfolded gently, threaded into the daily life of the countryside, the seasons, and the people who lived there. The war, though ever present, moved quietly alongside the gentle rhythm of life itself. Spring emerged slowly, the frost retreating, streams swelling gently with melted snow, and tender green shoots pushing through softened earth. Soldiers paused under the shade of trees, drinking from clear streams, adjusting saddles, and listening to the soft chorus of birds. Villagers plowed carefully, planted crops, and tended livestock, their movements calm, deliberate, and in quiet harmony with the awakening land. The subtle sounds of bees, insects, and soft winds mingled with the occasional clatter of distant tools, creating a peaceful, layered backdrop to the daily routines of both camp and village. As summer deepened, fields ripened to muted golds. Barley swayed softly in warm breezes. Oats rustled gently under hands that harvested with patience and care. Soldiers rested in shade, watching clouds drift slowly across the sky, listening to distant village sounds, or closing their eyes for a quiet reprieve. Villagers worked steadily, repairing fences, tending animals, baking bread, and preparing stores for cooler months. Fires smoked lazily from cottages and campfires, their faint scent mingling with the warmth of earth and grain. The pace of life, like the war itself, was slow, deliberate, and unhurried, each day folding softly into the next. Evenings were long and gentle. Fires glowed low, casting soft light across straw mats, wooden floors, and tents arranged carefully in neat rows. Soldiers repaired gear and polished armor, speaking quietly of distant homes or shared memories. Villagers moved gently about chores, churning butter, mending clothes, tending animals, and preparing the evening meal. The wind whispered softly through trees, streams murmured quietly in the valleys, and stars emerged slowly, their cool, distant light blending with the deepening dusk. Shadows lengthened and softened, carrying the world into the still, gentle embrace of night. Letters and reports continued to move slowly through the countryside, tracing the long, patient pulse of the campaign. Riders followed winding paths through forests and over streams, delivering news and instructions carefully, mindful of horses' stamina and terrain. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements, supplies, and observations meticulously before dispatching replies. Decisions unfolded over days and weeks, aligning with the soft, enduring rhythm of the land. Strategy itself became a patient, deliberate activity, echoing the subtle cadence of life in the countryside and the slow progress of the war. Winter returned once more, frosting the fields and softening the world under delicate layers of snow. Soldiers wrapped themselves in thick wool, tending fires with care and moving slowly over frozen paths. Villagers huddled close to hearths, preparing food stores, caring for animals, and performing daily routines in measured, deliberate ways. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, and wind rustled through the bare trees. Even in the midst of conflict, life adapted to the rhythms of the season, flowing softly, patiently, and enduringly. The 9 Years' War, stretched across years and seasons, unfolded in the quiet, patient rhythm of endurance. Soldiers maintained camps, cleaned weapons, tended horses, and marched slowly over hills and across streams. Villagers baked bread, fed livestock, repaired homes, and moved gently through fields and cottages. Scouts moved like shadows, reporting on forests, rivers, and villages. Every day was a soft, deliberate act of continuity, every small gesture a thread woven into the long, gentle tapestry of life. The war, though ever present, became part of the fabric of everyday existence, moving quietly with the rhythm of the seasons, land, and people's soft morning light stretched across the gentle hills, glimmering on dew-laden grass and softening the contours of stone walls and hedgerows. Soldiers stirred slowly in their tents, stretching limbs stiff from the chill of the night, adjusting cloaks and packs, and tending fires that glowed faintly, sending small trails of smoke curling lazily into the pale sky. Breakfast was quiet and deliberate. Thin porridge, a small slice of bread, water warmed over embers, each movement careful and measured, as though the pace of life itself determined the rhythm of the camp. Even the soft rustle of leaves and distant murmur of streams blended seamlessly into the calm of early day. Villagers moved gently through their routines. Women carried clay pots from wells, balancing them steadily as they returned to hearths where fires glowed softly, coaxing warmth to life for morning meals. Children wandered between cottages and along low stone walls, their laughter muted and careful, blending with the soft chorus of birds and the hum of insects. Men guided livestock slowly through fields, checking fences and gates, and tending animals with practiced, unhurried gestures. The air carried the combined scent of damp earth, peat smoke, and faint herbs growing near cottages, a subtle fragrance that settled over both the land and its people like a slow exhale. English soldiers moved through the countryside with measured steps. Boots pressed softly into the soft, dew-slicked earth. Wagons creaked quietly along narrow paths, horses' hooves making muted, rhythmic beats. Soldiers adjusted packs, polished buckles, and cleaned weapons with calm diligence. Every movement was deliberate, every step considered. There was no rush here, only the slow, steady progression of men, horses, and wagons across hills, through valleys, and along rivers, each day folding gently into the next. Hugh O'Neill watched the land and movements with patient attention. Scouts slipped through forests and along riverbanks, their steps light and precise, their eyes alert for signs of distant activity, tracks, and the soft rhythm of village life. Reports were folded into letters and instructions that traveled slowly across hills, streams, and muddy roads. Each plan, each movement, unfolded with careful deliberation. The war, though ever present, was carried gently through the lives of soldiers, villagers, and land alike, woven into the enduring rhythm of everyday existence. Spring deepened, and the hills and valleys awoke fully. Streams ran clear and cold, softened soil yielded new green shoots, and forests brightened with tender leaves. Soldiers rested beneath trees, adjusting saddles, drinking slowly from streams, listening to the quiet murmur of life. Villagers plowed carefully, planted early crops, repaired fences, and tended livestock. Every movement, every task, unfolded in harmony with the soft pulse of the land. Bees hummed lightly, insects moved in slow arcs across flowers, and wind whispered gently through trees, forming a natural lullaby for all who listened. Summer settled over the hills with warm, lingering light. Fields of barley swayed softly in gentle breezes. Oats rustled under careful hands, and soldiers paused beneath dappled shade, closing their eyes for quiet respite or watching clouds drift across pale blue skies. Villagers worked steadily, baking bread, repairing stone walls, tending animals, and preparing stores. Smoke from cottages drifted in lazy columns into the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of grass and ripening grain. Life, in all its details, moved slowly, deliberately, blending seamlessly with the measured, patient rhythm of the long campaign. Evenings stretched long and soft, fires glowing low in cottages and camps alike. Soldiers polished armor and repaired gear, speaking in hushed tones about home, family, or small, distant memories. Villagers completed evening tasks with careful attention, churning butter, preparing meals, mending clothing, feeding livestock. The wind whispered softly through trees, rivers murmured gently through valleys, and stars emerged slowly across the darkening sky. Shadows lengthened, softened, and folded into night, carrying the entire landscape into a tranquil stillness, a quiet lullaby that invited rest and reflection. Letters continued their slow passage, tracing the long, patient pulse of the war. Riders followed winding paths through forests, over streams, and across hills, delivering reports and instructions with careful attention to terrain and the endurance of horses. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements, supplies, and observations meticulously, then dispatched replies that would take weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in harmony with the unhurried rhythms of the land and the patient, persistent flow of daily life. Winter returned with its soft touch, frosting fields and rooftops with delicate layers of snow. Soldiers layered themselves in thick wool, tending fires and moving slowly along frozen tracks. Villagers huddled close to hearths, preparing food stores, caring for livestock, and performing daily routines with deliberate attention. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, wind rustled through bare branches, and the quiet of the seasons settled over both people and land. Even in conflict, life conformed to these gentle rhythms, moving steadily, patiently, and with enduring care. The 9 Years' War, stretched across years and seasons, revealed the endurance not only of armies but of everyday life. Soldiers maintained camps, cleaned weapons, tended horses, and walked softly through hills and valleys. Villagers baked bread, fed livestock, repaired cottages, and moved gently through fields and paths. Scouts moved like shadows, bringing reports of forests, rivers, and distant villages. Each day was a quiet act of continuity, every small gesture a thread woven into the long, gentle tapestry of life. The war, ever present, became part of the enduring rhythm of the land, the people, and the changing seasons. Camps and forts were cared for with slow, methodical attention. Tents were pitched and adjusted, fires built and maintained, weapons polished, and horses groomed and fed. Scouts observed forests and villages quietly, bringing messages and information that shaped plans in a deliberate, measured way. Strategy itself became a patient, enduring activity, echoing the natural cadence of seasons, the pulse of daily life, and the slow march of time. Even the acts of war, when stripped to their rhythm, were gentle, continuous, and unhurried, moving as naturally as rivers flowing through valleys. Villages mirrored this calm persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned with care, livestock moved calmly along familiar paths, and children played softly with curiosity. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and old customs told in deliberate, gentle tones. Nature itself contributed to this quiet continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured softly, and distant hills held the subtle marks of time, carrying the soft rhythm of life forward with serene consistency. Every small gesture, every quiet act, became part of the long, enduring cadence of both life and war. The 9 Years' War stretched across years, moving in the patient rhythm of seasons and daily life. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike adapted to the gentle flow of time. Camps were raised and dismantled, fires maintained, letters written and delivered, paths walked carefully, and routines repeated with quiet diligence. In all of this, the war became inseparable from the slow, enduring rhythms of existence, woven gently into the lives of people and the landscapes they moved through, a soft thread in the grand, patient tapestry of history. The soft light of early morning stretched over the hills, touching the misty valleys with a gentle glow. Soldiers stirred slowly in their camps, stretching stiff limbs, adjusting damp cloaks, and tending fires that smoldered quietly from the night. Breakfast was unhurried, porridge ladled into bowls, slices of bread broken carefully, water warmed over embers. Every movement, every gesture, was measured and deliberate, echoing the slow rhythm of the surrounding land. Even the distant murmur of streams and the rustle of leaves seemed to synchronize with the soft pulse of the camp. Villagers began their day with equal patience. Women carried clay pots of water from wells, returning to hearths where fires were coaxed into life. Children wandered along stone walls and paths between cottages, laughter muted and gentle, mingling with the soft sounds of birds and insects awakening. Men guided livestock slowly through fields, checking fences, adjusting gates, and tending animals with careful attention. The air carried the faint sense of damp earth, peat smoke, and growing herbs, wrapping the countryside in a subtle, comforting aroma. The English columns advanced steadily, boots pressing softly into the moist earth, wagons creaking faintly along narrow, winding paths. Horses stamped gently, soldiers checked packs and polished buckles, weapons cleaned with methodical care. Each step was deliberate, each motion measured, as the march continued slowly through hills, forests, and along rivers. The pace reflected not urgency but endurance, a quiet, persistent movement that would stretch across months and seasons, echoing the slow unfolding of the larger campaign. Hugh O'Neill observed carefully from the high ground. Scouts moved lightly through forests and along riverbanks, noting distant troops, road conditions, and village life, reporting back in whispers and folded letters. Each movement, each decision, unfolded with patience, woven into the daily life of the countryside. War here was not sudden or explosive, but gentle in its persistence, threaded quietly through the fabric of human routines, seasonal cycles, and the enduring landscape. Spring gave way slowly to summer. Streams swelled with melted frost, green shoots pushed through the soil, and forests brightened with tender leaves. Soldiers paused beneath trees, drinking from cold streams, adjusting saddles, listening to the faint murmur of distant village life. Villagers plowed carefully, planted crops, tended animals, baked bread, and repaired fences. The countryside seemed to breathe in gentle rhythms. The hum of bees, the soft wind through trees, the distant bleat of sheep, the slow swaying of grain in light breezes. Life and war moved together in quiet harmony. Summer deepened, soft warmth lingering over fields ripened to muted gold. Barley and oats swayed under gentle breezes. Soldiers rested in dappled shade, eyes closed for quiet moments or simply watching clouds drift slowly across the sky. Villagers worked steadily, baking bread, tending livestock, repairing stone walls, and storing crops for colder months. Fires smoked faintly from cottages and campfires, mixing with the subtle fragrance of earth, grain, and warm air. Life moved slowly, carefully, deliberately, in a gentle rhythm mirrored in every step of the ongoing campaign. Evenings were long and soft, fires glowing low, casting gentle light over straw mats, wooden floors, and neatly arranged tents. Soldiers repaired gear, polished armor, spoke quietly of family and memories. Villagers moved through evening tasks with care, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding livestock, preparing the final meal of the day. The wind whispered through trees, rivers murmured softly, and stars emerged gradually, their cool light blending with the darkening sky. Shadows lengthened and softened, carrying the land, the people, and the camp into gentle night. Letters and reports continued their slow journey across the countryside. Riders traced winding paths through forests, along rivers, and over hills, delivering carefully folded messages. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements and supplies meticulously, preparing replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in step with the patient, enduring rhythm of the land. Even strategy was gentle, deliberate, unfolding over time rather than in sudden, dramatic bursts. The pulse of war matched the pulse of life itself. Steady, soft, and continuous. Winter returned, frosting fields and rooftops with pale, delicate layers of snow. Soldiers wrapped themselves in wool, tended fires, and moved slowly over icy paths. Villagers huddled near hearths, feeding livestock, preparing stores, and performing daily chores with quiet care. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, wind moved softly through bare branches, and the world seemed wrapped in gentle hush. Even amid conflict, life moved in patient rhythms, soft and enduring, like a lullaby stretching across time. The 9 Years' War persisted in this quiet, enduring cadence. Soldiers maintained camps, polished weapons, tended horses, and traveled slowly across hills and streams. Villagers baked bread, fed animals, repaired homes, and moved gently through fields and paths. Scouts moved like shadows, delivering messages about forests, rivers, and distant villages. Each day was a small, deliberate act of continuity, every gesture a thread woven into the long, gentle tapestry of life. The war became inseparable from the rhythm of existence itself, threaded quietly into the land, the people, and the cycles of the seasons. Camps and forts were tended with care, tents pitched and adjusted, fires built and maintained, weapons cleaned, horses fed and groomed. Scouts observed quietly, bringing reports that shaped plans in patient, measured ways. Strategy, like life, unfolded slowly, with careful attention to every detail. Even acts of war, in their rhythm and repetition, became part of the enduring, gentle flow of existence, moving with the soft pulse of rivers, winds, and passing days. Villages mirrored the quiet persistence of the campaign. Bread baked slowly, milk churned with care, livestock moved calmly along familiar paths, and children played softly, observing the subtleties of their surroundings. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and traditions told with gentle, unhurried cadence. Nature itself contributed to this continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured softly. Hills held the gentle marks of passing seasons, carrying the rhythm of life forward in slow, unbroken harmony. Every small action became part of the enduring cadence of both life and war. The 9 Years' War stretched across years, measured in patience, persistence, and subtle change. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders alike moved with the soft pulse of the land. Camps were razed and dismantled, fires maintained, letters written and delivered, paths walked carefully, routines repeated with quiet diligence. In this long, patient flow, the war became part of the enduring rhythm of existence, woven gently into the lives of people, the contours of the landscape, and the unfolding of seasons. A continuous, calm, unhurried thread through history. The soft, pale light of early morning spilled across the hills once more, touching the tops of stone walls and the edges of hedgerows with a delicate glow. Soldiers stirred in their camps, stretching limbs that had grown stiff from long nights of vigil, brushing dew from cloaks and boots, tending the embers of fires that glowed faintly. Breakfast was quiet and deliberate, porridge ladled into bowls, slices of bread broken gently, water warmed over embers. Every gesture was slow, each movement measured, in rhythm with the soft awakening of the land itself. Even the faint murmur of distant streams and the rustle of leaves seemed to settle into the pace of the morning. Villagers carried on with their careful routines. Women balanced clay pots of water from wells, returning to hearths to coax life into the morning fires, their movements calm and purposeful. Children wandered between cottages and along low stone walls, their laughter muted and careful, blending with birdsong and the soft hum of insects. Men guided livestock across fields, adjusting gates and fences, tending animals with patient care. The air carried faint scents of damp earth, peat smoke, and herbs growing near cottages, wrapping the countryside in a soft, comforting aroma that seemed to slow time itself. English soldiers moved steadily through the countryside. Boots pressed softly into the damp earth. Wagons creaked faintly along narrow, muddy tracks, and horses' hooves struck with gentle, rhythmic beats. Soldiers adjusted packs, polished buckles, and cleaned weapons with methodical attention. The march continued slowly, deliberately, measured by terrain, weather, and the soft rhythm of the surrounding life. Each step, each motion, became part of a continuous, unhurried unfolding, echoing the patient pulse of the land itself. Hugh O'Neill observed the landscape and the movements of his scouts with careful attention. Shadows slipped quietly through forests and along riverbanks, scouts noting the subtle signs of distant troops, road conditions, and village life. Reports were delivered folded into letters, each one shaping decisions in a slow, deliberate manner. Plans unfolded gently, woven into the fabric of everyday life. The war, ever present, moved quietly alongside the steady rhythm of the countryside, threaded softly through the seasons, the routines, and the landscapes of the people who lived there. Spring softened into summer. Streams ran clear and cold through valleys. Green shoots pushed through the softened earth, and forests brightened with tender leaves. Soldiers paused beneath the shade of trees, drinking slowly from streams, adjusting saddles, listening to the faint murmur of distant village activity. Villagers plowed carefully, planted crops, baked bread, and tended livestock. Bees hummed lightly over flowers, the wind whispered through trees, and the distant swaying of grain in gentle breezes created a soft symphony of calm that blended naturally with the measured movements of the campaign. Summer deepened, warmth lingering in the fields and along the hills. Barley and oats ripened in muted golds. Soldiers rested in dappled shade, observing clouds drift lazily across the pale blue sky. Villagers worked steadily, harvesting crops, repairing stone walls, tending livestock, preparing stores for the cooler months. Fires smoked faintly from cottages and campfires, mixing with the warmth of earth, grain, and sun-warmed air. Life moved slowly, deliberately, each day folding softly into the next, the rhythms of human and natural life intertwining seamlessly. Evenings were long, stretching gently as fires glowed low in cottages and camps. Soldiers polished armor, repaired gear, spoke quietly of family, home, and past days. Villagers completed evening chores, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding animals, preparing the final meal. The wind whispered softly through the trees, streams murmured in the valleys, stars emerged slowly, their cool light blending with the deepening dusk. Shadows lengthened and softened, carrying the land, the people, and the camp into stillness. Night arrived gently, like a slow, comforting exhale. Letters and reports continued their journey across the countryside. Riders traced winding paths through forests, along streams, and over hills, delivering news and instructions with gentle care. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements, supplies, and observations meticulously, then prepared replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in step with the patient, enduring rhythm of the land. Even strategy moved slowly, aligning with the quiet pulse of the world around it. The war itself, though present, became a thread woven into the calm, persistent tapestry of everyday life. Winter returned, frosting fields and rooftops with thin layers of snow. Soldiers layered woolen clothing, tended fires, and moved slowly across frozen paths. Villagers huddled close to hearths, feeding animals, storing provisions, performing daily routines with patient care. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, wind moved softly through bare branches, and a hushed quiet settled over the countryside. Even amid war, life adapted to the rhythm of the season, flowing steadily, patiently, and gently. The 9 Years' War stretched across years, measured by endurance, quiet persistence, and the slow unfolding of days and seasons. Soldiers maintained camps, polished weapons, tended horses, and moved gently through hills and valleys. Villagers baked bread, fed livestock, repaired homes, and moved softly across fields and paths. Scouts traveled like shadows, delivering reports on forests, rivers, and villages. Every day was a gentle act of continuity, every small gesture a thread woven into the long, enduring tapestry of life. War became inseparable from the rhythms of existence, threaded softly into the land, the people, and the cycles of the seasons. Camps and forts were maintained with steady attention. Tents pitched and adjusted, fires built and nurtured, weapons polished, horses fed and groomed. Scouts moved quietly, observing forests and villages, bringing messages and reports that shaped plans with patient, deliberate care. Strategy, like life itself, unfolded slowly, every choice measured, every step considered. Even acts of war became part of the soft, enduring pulse of existence, moving gently, like rivers winding through valleys, carrying time along with them. Villages mirrored this persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk churned with care, livestock moved along familiar paths, and children played with quiet curiosity. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and traditions told with soft, unhurried cadence. Nature contributed to this continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured gently. Hills held the subtle marks of passing seasons, and the rhythm of life carried forward softly and steadily. Every small act became part of the long, gentle cadence of both life and war. The first pale light of morning stretched across the hills, brushing gently against dew-specked grass and softening the contours of stone walls and hedgerows. Soldiers stirred slowly in their camps, stretching stiff limbs, brushing dew from cloaks, tending the faint embers of fires that had smoldered through the night. Breakfast was quiet and deliberate. Thin porridge ladled carefully into bowls, slices of bread broken gently, water warmed over low flames. Each movement was slow, considered, measured to the rhythm of the land itself. Even the rustle of leaves in the soft breeze and the faint murmur of streams seemed to echo the calm pulse of the morning. Villagers began their day in equally gentle motion. Women balanced clay pots of water from wells, returning to hearths to coax life into the fires for morning meals. Children wandered along stone walls and narrow paths, their laughter soft, blending with birdsong and the hum of insects. Men guided livestock slowly across fields, checking fences, adjusting gates, and tending animals with patient care. The air carried the faint sense of damp earth, peat smoke, and the subtle fragrance of herbs and flowers, a quiet, calming perfume that seemed to settle over both people and land alike. English soldiers moved steadily through the countryside. Boots pressed softly into damp earth, wagons creaked quietly along narrow tracks, and horses' hooves struck the ground in gentle rhythm. Soldiers adjusted packs, polished buckles, and cleaned weapons with careful attention, each movement deliberate and unhurried. The march continued slowly, guided by terrain, weather, and the soft rhythm of the surrounding life. Each day was a patient unfolding, each step an unhurried contribution to the long, quiet flow of the campaign. Hugh O'Neill observed the landscape with quiet attentiveness. Scouts moved lightly through forests and along riverbanks, noting distant troops, road conditions, and signs of village life. Reports traveled folded into letters and instructions, shaping decisions with careful thought. Every movement, every choice, unfolded gently, woven into the daily life of the countryside. War existed here not as sudden chaos but as a persistent, quiet presence, threaded softly into the routines of villagers, soldiers, and the enduring landscape. Spring moved gradually into summer. Streams ran clear and cold through valleys, green shoots pushed through softened soil, and forests brightened with tender leaves. Soldiers paused beneath trees to drink from streams, adjust saddles, and listen to the soft murmurs of village life. Villagers plowed carefully, planted early crops, baked bread, and tended livestock. Bees hummed lightly over flowers, wind whispered softly through trees, and the distant swaying of grain created a slow, natural symphony, merging seamlessly with the measured movements of people and armies alike. Summer deepened, warmth lingering over hills and fields. Barley and oats ripened in muted golds. Soldiers rested in dappled shade, watching clouds drift lazily across pale blue skies. Villagers worked steadily, harvesting crops, repairing stone walls, tending livestock, and storing grains for the coming cooler months. Fires drifted smoke lazily from cottages and campfires, mingling with the earthy scents of soil, grain, and warm air. Life moved slowly, deliberately, each day folding softly into the next, the rhythms of human and natural life harmonizing with the gentle pulse of the campaign. Evenings stretched long and soft. Fires glowed low in cottages and camps, casting gentle light across straw mats, wooden floors, and neatly arranged tents. Soldiers repaired gear, polished armor, and spoke quietly of family, home, or memories of past days. Villagers completed evening chores, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding animals, preparing the final meal. The wind whispered softly through trees, rivers murmured in the valleys, and stars emerged gradually, their cool light blending with deepening dusk. Shadows lengthened and softened, carrying the land, the people, and the camps into stillness. Night arrived gently, like a long, calming exhale. Letters and reports traced the patient flow of the campaign. Riders followed winding paths through forests and over streams, delivering messages with careful attention to the stamina of their horses and the condition of the terrain. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded observations meticulously before dispatching replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in step with the enduring rhythm of the land. Even strategy moved slowly, aligning with the quiet pulse of the world around it. The war itself, though always present, became a thread woven into the calm, persistent tapestry of everyday life. Winter returned, frosting fields and rooftops with thin layers of snow. Soldiers layered woolen clothing, tended fires, and moved carefully along frozen paths. Villagers huddled close to hearths, feeding livestock, storing provisions, performing daily routines with deliberate care. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, and wind moved softly through bare branches. A hushed quiet settled over the countryside. Even amid war, life adapted to the rhythm of the season, flowing steadily, patiently, and gently. The 9 Years' War, spanning years and seasons, revealed the endurance of people as much as armies. Soldiers maintained camps, polished weapons, tended horses, and traveled slowly across hills and streams. Villagers baked bread, fed livestock, repaired homes, and moved gently across fields and paths. Scouts traveled like quiet shadows, delivering reports on forests, rivers, and villages. Each day was a gentle act of continuity, each small gesture a thread in the long, enduring tapestry of life. The war became part of the rhythms of existence itself, woven softly into the land, the people, and the seasons. Camps and forts were maintained with steady care. Tents were pitched and adjusted, fires built and nurtured, weapons cleaned, horses fed and groomed. Scouts moved quietly, observing forests and villages, bringing messages and reports that shaped plans patiently and deliberately. Strategy, like life, unfolded slowly, every decision measured, every step considered. Even acts of war became part of the soft, enduring pulse of existence, moving gently, like rivers winding through valleys, carrying time along with them. Villages mirrored this calm persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned with care, livestock moved calmly along familiar paths, and children played with quiet curiosity. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and old customs told in gentle, unhurried tones. Nature itself contributed to this continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured softly, hills held the subtle marks of passing seasons, carrying the rhythm of life forward softly and steadily. Every small action became part of the long, gentle cadence of both life and war. Slowly, the final years of the campaign began to unfold. Armies moved less frequently, campaigns became shorter, and small garrisons maintained positions with quiet diligence rather than sudden action. Villagers resumed more of their daily routines as the intensity of conflict softened. Fields were plowed and harvested with greater attention to care, children's laughter carried further across hills, and the soft murmur of life became more audible. Even the distant drums of war seemed to fade into the gentle background of human and natural rhythms. The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills, its soft light brushing gently across the dewy fields and the tops of stone walls. Soldiers stirred in their camps, stretching limbs, adjusting damp cloaks, and tending fires that glowed low, the smoke curling lazily into the pale sky. Breakfast was quiet, simple. Thin porridge ladled into bowls, bread broken carefully by hand, water warmed over embers. Every movement was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, in tune with the gentle rhythm of the land itself. Even the faint rustle of leaves and the murmuring of distant streams seemed to echo the soft cadence of the morning. Villagers moved through their daily routines with equal care. Women balanced clay pots from wells, returning to hearths to coax fires into life, their steps slow and measured. Children wandered along stone walls and narrow paths, their laughter quiet and gentle, blending with birdsong and the hum of insects. Men guided livestock across fields, checking fences and gates, tending animals with patient, practiced hands. The air carried the subtle sense of damp earth, peat smoke, and herbs growing near cottages, wrapping the countryside in a soft, soothing aroma that seemed to slow time itself. The English columns moved through the landscape with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Boots pressed softly into soft, wet earth. Wagons creaked faintly along narrow, winding paths. Horses' hooves struck the ground in gentle cadence. Soldiers adjusted packs, polished buckles, cleaned weapons, all with careful, deliberate attention. Each day unfolded slowly, measured by terrain, weather, and the soft pulse of surrounding life. The campaign was endurance, patience, and continuity more than sudden action, each step blending into the ongoing, steady flow of days. Hugh O'Neill observed with calm attentiveness, watching the movement of his scouts through forests and along riverbanks. Their steps were light, precise, eyes noting distant troops, road conditions, and subtle signs of village life. Reports traveled in folded letters, guiding decisions with patient thought. Plans unfolded gradually, integrated into the quiet rhythms of everyday life. The war, ever present, moved softly alongside the cycles of the countryside, intertwined gently with the lives of villagers, soldiers, and the enduring landscape. Spring gave way fully to summer. Streams ran clear and cold through valleys. Green shoots pushed through the softened earth, and forests brightened with tender new leaves. Soldiers paused beneath trees, drinking from streams, adjusting saddles, listening to the soft hum of insects and distant village activity. Villagers plowed carefully, planted crops, tended animals, baked bread, and repaired fences. Bees hummed lightly over flowers, wind whispered through leaves, and the distant sway of ripening grain created a soft, natural symphony that blended with the measured movements of people and armies alike. Summer deepened. Fields of barley and oats ripened in muted golds. Soldiers rested in dappled shade, closing eyes for quiet moments, watching clouds drift slowly across pale blue skies. Villagers worked steadily, harvesting crops, repairing stone walls, tending livestock, preparing stores for the cooler months. Fires from cottages and campfires drifted smoke lazily into the warm air, mingling with the faint fragrance of soil and ripened grain. Life moved slowly, deliberately, each day folding softly into the next, the rhythm of human and natural life flowing together with gentle continuity. Evenings stretched long and soft. Fires glowed low in cottages and camps, casting warm light across straw mats, wooden floors, and neatly arranged tents. Soldiers polished armor, repaired gear, and spoke quietly of home, family, or past memories. Villagers finished evening chores, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding animals, preparing the last meal of the day. The wind whispered softly through trees, streams murmured gently through valleys, stars appeared gradually across the darkening sky. Shadows lengthened, softened, and folded into night, carrying all into stillness. Night arrived gently like a slow exhale. Letters continued their slow passage, tracing the patient flow of the campaign. Riders followed winding paths through forests, along streams, and over hills, delivering carefully folded reports. Clerks in Dublin and London recorded movements and supplies meticulously, preparing replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in step with the soft, enduring rhythm of the land. Even strategy moved slowly, matching the gentle pulse of the countryside. War itself became a thread woven into the calm, persistent tapestry of everyday life. Winter returned once more, frosting fields and rooftops with thin layers of snow. Soldiers layered wool, tended fires, and moved carefully along frozen paths. Villagers huddled near hearths, feeding animals, storing provisions, performing daily tasks with patient care. Streams whispered beneath fragile ice, wind rustled through bare branches, and the quiet of the season settled over the countryside. Even amid war, life adapted to the rhythm of the season, flowing steadily, patiently, and gently. The final years of the 9 Years' War unfolded with this same quiet endurance. Armies moved less frequently, garrisons maintained positions with care, and villagers resumed more of their daily routines. Crops were harvested, fences repaired, livestock tended, children's laughter carried further across the hills, and the soft hum of everyday life grew louder as the intensity of conflict slowly diminished. Even distant drums of war seemed to fade into the gentle background of human and natural rhythms. Camps and forts were maintained steadily, with tents pitched and adjusted, fires nurtured, weapons polished, and horses fed and groomed. Scouts traveled quietly, observing forests and villages, delivering information that shaped plans patiently and deliberately. Strategy, like life itself, unfolded slowly, every choice measured, every step considered. Even acts of war became part of the soft, enduring pulse of existence, moving gently, like rivers winding through valleys, carrying the passage of time along. Villages mirrored this calm persistence. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned with care, livestock moved quietly along familiar paths, children explored softly, curiosity guiding each gentle step. Conversations were subdued, stories of ancestors and old customs told with soft, deliberate cadence. Nature itself contributed to the continuity. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured quietly, hills held the subtle marks of seasons and passing years. Every small act became part of the long, enduring rhythm of both life and war. Eventually, the slow, patient resolution of the campaign began to take hold. Armies withdrew with measured caution, garrisons were left in place for safety, and villages resumed more of their daily lives with care and attention. Soldiers returned slowly to homes, the quiet of their passage softening the land, the air, and the hills. Villagers welcomed the gradual return of peace with the same deliberate care that had guided their work during years of conflict. Fields were plowed, homes repaired, and life resumed in gentle harmony with the landscape and the rhythms of the seasons. The 9 Years' War concluded not with sudden explosions or dramatic upheaval, but as a long, unhurried tide of change. Soldiers, villagers, and leaders adapted, restored routines, tended the land, and rebuilt lives quietly. Life, as it always had, moved gently through the seasons, the hills, and the villages, each day folding softly into the next. The story of these years became part of the enduring, patient tapestry of Ireland and England, woven quietly into the land, the people, and the soft rhythms of time itself. The first light of dawn stretched across the hills once again, softer than ever, as though the world itself had exhaled overnight. Frost lingered in low hollows, glinting faintly like scattered crystals, and the fields lay quiet, wrapped in the pale hush of morning. Soldiers rose from their tents with deliberate care, moving slowly to tend the fires that still smoldered from the night. Woolen cloaks were adjusted over shoulders, boots tied snugly, and packs checked with methodical attention. Breakfast was quiet. Porridge ladled gently into bowls, bread broken and shared in soft gestures, water warmed over embers. Even the simplest acts carried weight in their calm repetition, echoing the enduring rhythm of life itself. Villagers moved through the day with equal softness. Women drew water from wells, stepping carefully along frost-slicked paths, the clay pots balanced with practiced ease. Fires were coaxed to life in cottages, small flames dancing gently across hearthstones. Children wandered slowly along the worn stone walls, their laughter muted by distance and attentiveness, the soft thrum of curiosity present in each careful step. Men guided livestock across the fields, adjusting gates, inspecting fences, and watching animals with quiet patience. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, peat smoke, and the subtle green of young herbs and early spring growth, a scent that wrapped the land in comfort and continuity. The English columns moved forward, each step measured and deliberate. Boots pressed softly into wet earth, the creak of wagons and the gentle jingle of harnesses blending with the low, distant sound of flowing streams. Soldiers polished buckles and adjusted straps, cleaned weapons with slow care, and moved in a rhythm dictated by the land itself. There was no urgency in these steps, only steady endurance. Each day unfolded quietly, measured by terrain, by weather, and by the ever-present pulse of village life and seasonal change. Hugh O'Neill watched. From gentle rises in the land, scouts moving like shadows along riverbanks and through forests. Every footstep was deliberate, every glance attentive. Reports traveled carefully, folded into letters that traced their way across hills and along streams to guide decisions in a slow, considered manner. The war itself, though present, became almost like a whisper threaded into daily life, moving with the seasons, blending into the muted colors and textures of villages, fields, and rolling hills. As spring slowly faded into summer, fields of barley and oats shimmered in muted golds. Streams glimmered with the reflection of sky, and leaves on trees fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Soldiers rested beneath shade, drinking from cool waters, adjusting saddles, or simply closing their eyes to let the warmth of the sun seep through. Villagers plowed and planted, mended tools, baked bread, and tended animals. Bees hummed over flowers, wind whispered through the trees, and the distant sway of grain created a gentle, natural symphony. The rhythm of life and war blended together seamlessly, quiet and deliberate. Summer stretched long and warm. Fires in cottages glowed faintly in the early morning, smoke curling lazily into the air. Soldiers adjusted tents and equipment, polished armor with careful motions, and shared quiet conversation about home, past days, and memories. Villagers worked in the fields, repaired walls, gathered water, and carried out their daily routines with methodical attention. Evenings arrived slowly, casting long shadows and a muted, golden light. Stars emerged gradually overhead, their distant light mingling with the gentle glow of fire and the soft, low hum of the countryside at rest. As the years advanced, the war's presence softened. Armies moved with less frequency, garrisons maintained positions with quiet diligence, and villages resumed more of their routines. Fields were plowed and harvested with careful attention, fences repaired, livestock tended. Children's laughter traveled further across the hills, blending with the hum of bees, the wind in the trees, and the soft murmur of distant streams. Even the distant drums of war seemed to fade into the background of everyday life. Winter returned with a soft hush, frosting fields and rooftops with delicate layers of white. Soldiers layered themselves in wool, moved cautiously over frozen paths, and tended fires with care. Villagers gathered near hearths, feeding animals, storing provisions, and performing daily routines slowly and deliberately. Streams whispered beneath thin ice, wind rustled softly through bare branches, and the countryside seemed to hold its breath in quiet patience. Life, even amid conflict, adapted to the gentle rhythm of the season. Over time, soldiers began their slow return home. Camps were dismantled carefully, tents taken down, fires extinguished with methodical precision. Horses were led gently along familiar paths, wagons moved quietly across fields, and messages were delivered with patient care. Scouts retraced paths slowly, observing and reporting, ensuring that every step of withdrawal was deliberate. The countryside seemed to exhale, welcoming the quieter pace of life back into its folds. Villagers observed the soft return of peace with gentle attention. Homes were repaired, fences rebuilt, fires rekindled, and children's games resumed in stone yards and fields. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned, and the land itself seemed to recover in harmony with human care. Conversations were subdued and reflective, stories of the long years told quietly by hearths, passing traditions softly from one generation to the next. Nature, too, resumed its gentle rhythm. Wind whispered through leaves, streams murmured in valleys, and hills held the subtle marks of seasons and years, carrying the slow passage of time like a lullaby across the land. The 9 Years' War concluded without a dramatic crescendo. It ended as it had been, lived, slowly, patiently, and gently. Armies withdrew, garrisons held steady where needed, and villages continued their soft routines. The land absorbed the passing of soldiers' feet, wagons' wheels, and horses' hooves, smoothing over paths, fields, and streams with quiet patience. Life returned gradually to normal rhythms. Children played in the soft evening light, fires glowed in cottages, livestock moved calmly in the fields, and the distant hills stood quietly, witnesses to the enduring pulse of human life. The story of these years, stretching across seasons, villages, hills, and camps, became a quiet thread in the tapestry of history. Every act, every small, deliberate gesture of soldiers, villagers, and leaders was woven into the land itself. Life, even in the presence of war, continued its soft, enduring cadence. And so the 9 Years' War, long, patient, and deliberate, faded into memory as one of the many slow, gentle currents of human history, leaving behind a landscape, a people, and a rhythm that persisted quietly, gently, and enduringly. The soft light of morning crept across the hills once more, brushing pale gold across stone walls, hedgerows, and the gentle swell of farmland. The world seemed to wake gradually, each movement unfolding with patience. Soldiers in the remaining camps stretched slowly, feeling stiffness in limbs and the quiet ache of long days behind them. They adjusted woolen cloaks, tied boots carefully, and tended the small fires that still glowed from the night. Breakfast was a gentle ritual. Porridge ladled into bowls with measured care, bread broken slowly, water poured with deliberate calm. Each motion was precise, unhurried, in rhythm with the land and the season, as though even the simplest acts carried the weight of history's quiet pulse. Villagers moved softly along narrow paths between cottages. Women carried clay pots of water from wells, balancing them as they returned to warm kitchens. They coaxed small flames to life in hearths, watching the soft glow spread across hearthstones. Children wandered between cottages, their laughter quiet, careful, blending with the distant hum of insects and birdsong in the rising warmth of morning. Men guided livestock across the soft, dew-kissed fields, checking fences and gates, tending animals with patient, practiced hands. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, peat smoke, and early herbs, a comforting aroma that seemed to wrap the countryside in a protective, slow-moving lull. The English columns, though fewer now, moved steadily, deliberately, boots pressing into soft earth, wagon wheels creaking faintly along narrow paths. Horses' hooves tapped out a gentle rhythm, echoing across the hills. Soldiers polished buckles, adjusted straps, cleaned weapons, and tended their few remaining supplies with careful attention. Each step, each motion was measured and unhurried. There was no rush, only the slow, patient unfolding of days, aligned with terrain, weather, and the gentle rhythms of village life around them. Hugh O'Neill moved through the soft morning light with quiet attentiveness. Scouts slipped through forests and along riverbanks, eyes alert to distant movement, to the faint signs of village life, and to the soft tracks left by wandering animals. Every footstep was careful, every observation deliberate. Reports moved in folded letters, slow to travel, shaping plans and choices with the weight of careful thought. The war itself was no longer abrupt or chaotic, but had settled into a quiet, enduring presence, woven into the daily rhythms of life, the contours of the land, and the soft patterns of seasons and years. Spring continued its gentle progression. Streams glimmered in the soft sunlight, the air carried a faint, sweet freshness, and forests filled slowly with tender green leaves. Soldiers paused under the shade of trees to drink from clear streams, adjust their saddles, and simply breathe the quiet of the countryside. Villagers plowed, carefully, sowed seeds, mended tools, baked bread, and tended livestock, each gesture deliberate, slow, and measured. Bees hummed softly, wind whispered through trees, and the gentle sway of ripening grain added to the symphony of small, quiet motions that carried the day forward. As summer approached its full warmth, the land seemed to stretch lazily beneath the sun. Fields of barley and oats swayed gently, reflecting golden light. Soldiers rested beneath dappled shade, closing eyes for brief moments, letting the warmth seep through their cloaks, feeling the steady pulse of earth beneath them. Villagers worked steadily, repairing fences, harvesting early crops, tending animals, and preparing stores for the months ahead. Fires drifted smoke lazily into the warm air, mixing with the fragrance of earth, grass, and sun-warmed grain. Life continued slowly, deliberately, every day folding softly into the next. Evenings arrived with long, gentle shadows. Fires glowed low in cottages and tent, alike, casting a warm, comforting light. Soldiers repaired gear, polished armor, and spoke softly of home, family, and memories of the past. Villagers finished evening chores, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding livestock, preparing the last meal. The wind whispered gently through trees, streams murmured in valleys, and stars emerged gradually overhead, their cool light blending with the warm glow of fire. The night unfolded as softly as a blanket, carrying the entire land and its people into a quiet, restorative stillness. Letters, traveling slowly, continued their patient course across the countryside. Riders followed winding paths through forests, along streams, and over hills, delivering folded messages that guided choices with careful thought. Clerks recorded movements and supplies with meticulous attention, sending replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in harmony with the soft, enduring rhythm of the land. Even strategy became slow, deliberate, and patient, echoing the gentle pulse of life itself. Winter returned again, frosting fields, cottages, and trees with thin, delicate layers of snow. Soldiers wrapped themselves in layers of wool, tending fires, moving carefully along frozen paths. Villagers huddled near hearths, feeding animals, preparing stores, and performing daily routines with deliberate patience. Streams whispered under thin ice, wind rustled softly through bare branches, and the countryside seemed to hold its breath. Even in the lingering shadow of war, life adapted to the slow, soothing rhythm of the season. The final years of the 9 Years' War unfolded gradually. Armies moved less frequently, garrisons held their positions with quiet diligence, and villages resumed more of their familiar routines. Crops were plowed and harvested with care, livestock tended, fences repaired, and children's laughter carried farther across the soft hills. Even the faint echoes of distant conflict seemed to fade, blending gently with the everyday rhythms of life. Soldiers began their slow journeys home, moving quietly across hills, fields, and streams. Camps were dismantled carefully, tents folded, fires extinguished, wagons moved with measured precision. The landscape exhaled, settling once more into its calm, enduring pattern. Villagers welcomed the soft return of peace with gentle attention. Homes were repaired, fences rebuilt, fires rekindled, and daily life resumed in its soft, measured rhythm. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned, and livestock moved quietly through familiar paths. Stories of the long years were told quietly by firesides, passed down with deliberate care, becoming part of the subtle tapestry of memory and tradition. Nature itself resumed its quiet, enduring rhythms. Streams murmured softly, wind whispered through leaves, and hills carried the subtle marks of seasons and years. The 9 Years' War ended not with sudden spectacle, but with patient unfolding, quiet withdrawals, and the slow restoration of life. Soldiers returned to homes, villages thrived once more, and the landscape absorbed the gentle passage of feet, wheels, and hooves. Life continued, soft and steady, the slow pulse of days, seasons, and years continuing without interruption. The story of these long, patient years became woven into the enduring tapestry of Ireland, threaded gently into land, people, and the quiet rhythms of history itself. The morning light filtered softly through the thin veil of mist that clung to the valleys, painting the landscape in pale shades of silver and green. Soldiers stirred slowly in their camps, feeling the stiffness of long marches in their limbs, adjusting woolen cloaks around shoulders, brushing dew from boots, and tending the faint embers of fires. Breakfast was quiet and deliberate. Porridge ladled gently into bowls, bread broken softly by hand, and water poured into cups warmed over the last flickering flames. Every motion was slow, precise, measured to the rhythm of the waking land itself. Even the faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze and the murmuring of distant streams seemed to join in this soft, deliberate cadence. Villagers moved through the day with careful, patient motion. Women balanced clay pots of water from wells, stepping cautiously across soft, damp earth, returning to cottages to coax fires to life. Children wandered along stone walls and narrow lanes, their footsteps light, their laughter quiet and subdued, blending seamlessly with birdsong and the gentle hum of insects. Men guided livestock through fields, tending fences and gates, inspecting animals with attentive care. The air carried a mixture of scents: damp soil, the smoke of peat fires, the faint sweetness of herbs and early flowers. Everything seemed wrapped in a gentle, comforting rhythm, the world moving with quiet persistence. The English columns advanced steadily, their movement deliberate, measured. Boots pressed softly into the softened earth. Wagon wheels creaked faintly along narrow tracks, horses' hooves marking a gentle, rhythmic beat. Soldiers adjusted packs, polished buckles, cleaned weapons, and tended horses with methodical care. Each step was considered, each motion deliberate. There was no urgency, only steady endurance, a patient unfolding of time, aligned with terrain, weather, and the slow pulse of village life surrounding them. Hugh O'Neill observed quietly from elevated ground, scouts slipping like shadows through forests and along riverbanks, noting the faintest signs of movement. Broken twigs, soft tracks, distant smoke. Reports moved in folded letters, tracing their way across hills, along rivers, reaching commanders with careful, patient timing. Every decision was slow, deliberate, measured. War had become a quiet, enduring presence, woven gently into the rhythms of daily life, threaded into the cycles of seasons, and reflected in the subtle patterns of the landscape. Spring slowly gave way to summer. Streams gleamed like silver threads. The air carried the sweetness of early flowers, and forests were alive with tender green leaves. Soldiers paused beneath the shade of trees to drink from clear water, adjusting saddles, listening to the soft, distant murmur of village life. Villagers plowed fields, sowed seeds, tended livestock, baked bread, repaired tools, and carried out countless small, deliberate acts that sustained daily life. Bees hummed gently over flowers, wind whispered through the trees, and the soft sway of ripening grain created a natural, subtle rhythm that blended seamlessly with the measured movements of soldiers and villagers alike. Summer stretched its warmth over the land. Fields of barley and oats shimmered golden in the gentle sunlight. Soldiers rested under shade, closing their eyes to let warmth seep through their cloaks, letting the soft pulse of the earth beneath them ground them in quiet presence. Villagers worked steadily, repairing walls, harvesting early crops, tending animals, and preparing stores for the colder months. Smoke drifted lazily from cottages and campfires, mingling with the earthy fragrance of soil and ripened grain. Life continued slowly, deliberately, each day folding softly into the next, each movement adding to the enduring rhythm of the countryside. Evenings arrived gradually, stretching long and gentle. Fires glowed low in cottages and tents, casting warm light that softened edges and shadows. Soldiers repaired gear, polished armor, and spoke quietly of home and memories. Villagers finished evening tasks, churning butter, mending clothing, feeding animals, and preparing the last meal of the day. Wind whispered softly through the trees, streams murmured in valleys, and stars emerged gradually overhead, their cool light blending with the warm glow of firelight. The night unfolded slowly, enveloping the land, the people, and the camps in calm and quiet. Letters and messages continued their slow journey across the countryside. Riders traced winding paths through forests and over rivers, delivering news with careful attention to the stamina of their horses. Clerks recorded movements, provisions, and observations with meticulous care, preparing replies that would take days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded gradually, in step with the enduring, patient rhythm of the land. Even strategy moved slowly, echoing the soft pulse of human life and natural patterns. The war itself, though ever-present, became a quiet thread, gently woven into the persistent fabric of daily life. Winter returned with a soft hush. Frost dusted fields and rooftops, streams whispered beneath thin ice, and the wind rustled softly through bare branches. Soldiers wrapped themselves in layers of wool, tending fires with care, moving slowly along frozen paths. Villagers huddled near hearths, feeding animals, storing provisions, performing daily routines with deliberate patience. Even amid lingering conflict, life adapted to the rhythm of the season, flowing steadily, patiently, and gently, a soft pulse that matched the quiet heartbeat of the land. The final years of the 9 Years' War unfolded slowly, patiently. Armies moved less often, garrisons maintained positions with quiet diligence, and villages resumed more of their familiar rhythms. Crops were harvested with care, livestock tended, fences repaired, and children's laughter traveled farther across fields and hills. The faint echoes of distant conflict blended into the background, absorbed by the land and softened by time. Soldiers began their slow journeys home, moving quietly over hills, along streams, and across familiar paths. Camps were dismantled, tents folded, fires extinguished, wagons rolled along with careful precision. The countryside exhaled, settling back into the gentle rhythm of daily life. Villagers observed the return of peace with quiet attention. Homes were repaired, fences rebuilt, fires rekindled, and daily routines resumed softly. Bread baked slowly, milk was churned, livestock moved along familiar paths, and children returned to gentle play. Stories of the long years were told by hearths, passed down carefully from one generation to the next. Nature resumed its soft rhythms. Streams murmured gently, wind whispered through leaves, and hills bore subtle marks of seasons and passing years. Every small act, every quiet gesture, became part of the enduring cadence of life. The 9 Years' War faded not with sudden spectacle, but with the patient, gentle unfolding of time. Soldiers returned home, garrisons stood quietly, villages thrived once more, and the landscape absorbed the passage of countless feet, wheels and hooves with soft patience. Life continued, steady and calm, the slow pulse of days, seasons, and years carrying forward. The story of these long, patient years wove quietly into the tapestry of Ireland, threaded gently into land, people, and the enduring rhythms of history. The evening deepened further, and the hills were cloaked in a quiet, gentle darkness. Only the faintest glow lingered on the edges of the fields, reflecting the last warmth of the sun. Fires flickered softly in cottages, sending gentle, amber light dancing across walls and wooden beams. The air was calm, carrying the soft scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of late-season flowers. Every sound, every movement, seemed slowed, softened by the peaceful hush of nightfall. In the villages, people moved with care, almost in slow motion. Doors closed gently behind them, the soft thud muffled by years of stone and timber. Livestock settled in pens, the quiet snuffle and shifting of animals blending with the distant whisper of wind through trees. Children yawned and curled beneath warm blankets, their small breaths steady and even. Women and men completed last chores, softly humming or speaking in quiet tones, their movements deliberate and unhurried, a perfect echo of the land itself. The rivers mirrored the darkening sky, moving in gentle, unbroken lines, catching the dim light of stars and moon as they began to appear. Each ripple and flow seemed to pulse slowly, a heartbeat that carried forward the quiet continuity of time. The forests leaned softly into the night, leaves rustling with the faintest touch of wind, as if the trees themselves were breathing gently, lulled by the steady rhythm of the world. The hills, long witnesses to centuries of life, seemed to fold in upon themselves, cradling the villages and fields in a gentle, protective embrace. In the distance, soldiers rested quietly. The clangor of armor and the march of boots were replaced by the soft sounds of cloth shifting, a low murmur of conversation, and the rhythmic breathing of horses in their stalls. Each campfire cast small, flickering shadows, softening the edges of the tents and the surrounding land. Even the quiet presence of the war, long endured, had softened into a distant memory, leaving only the gentle, persistent heartbeat of life itself. Now the night was complete. Stars shimmered faintly overhead, the moon casting a pale, comforting glow across hills, cottages, and fields. Streams whispered softly in their beds, wind moved through leaves like a lullaby, and the world exhaled. The long years of effort, endurance, and daily life, both human and natural, settled into a calm, steady rhythm. It was a rhythm that had persisted through seasons, through struggles and quiet triumphs alike. A rhythm that now surrounded you gently, carrying you softly toward rest. So, let yourself sink fully into this calm. Feel the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you, the quiet whisper of wind in trees, the soft glimmer of firelight and moonlight dancing at the edges of vision. Allow the memories of slow days, quiet tasks, and the steady unfolding of life to mingle with your own steady breath. Let the rhythm of villages, forests, streams, and hills guide you gently, softly, into sleep. And as you drift, Imagine the world holding itself gently, quietly, in patient watchfulness. Each field, each river, each cottage, each stone wall, everything that has witnessed the slow passage of time, is cradling you in its soft embrace. Feel the enduring pulse of life, history, and nature beneath you, carrying you into the calmest, most restful slumber. Sleep now, slowly, softly, letting the long, patient rhythm of history, of people, land, and time, carry you gently through the night. All is calm, all is quiet, all is at rest.